Recording should be started, John, and I think it muted you, just so you know.
Yep. So, all right, everybody. So my name is John Busshart. I work out of Ingram Micro's Business Transformation Center. If you haven't run into Business Transformation Center, I would certainly recommend that you leverage us. We are, a lot of people will say we're a demonstration or a proof of concept facility. I'll say that we're a lot more than that. So basically, I have equipment, across the HPE portfolio: servers, storage, networking, VM Essentials, or I should say Morpheus VM Essentials these days. I've got all these solutions available, and I can do kind of the demonstration like I'll show you today. But again, I have hardware that you could leverage from inside our facility. However you can leverage it remotely, you're more than welcome to do that. I've had people use it in interesting ways. For example, I had somebody replicate a volume on their array into my environment and prove to them that I could reanimate a virtual machine. I've had somebody come in and want to do RESTful API calls on an ILO interface. I've provided VPN access into my environment for somebody who just wanted to look and see how my SimpliVity setup configured. So I've got equipment. However you want to leverage this equipment, I'm certainly available. I'm available to you guys as well as your end users as well. Whatever helps you to be successful and drive sales through your organization, and in turn, Ingram Micro, I'm here to help you, however I can with the hardware. All right, so I'm going to share my desktop real quick. And I would like to get just a confirmation from somebody that they can see me. I can see my desktop here.
We can see it.
Okay. All right. So to give you a little background, again, I work at the Business Transformation Center. I've been in this role for about, 15, 16 years. Before that, I was most closely resembled what they'd call here a virtualization technology consultant. So back in the day when VMware was a twinkle in everybody's eyes, I was out providing content on virtualization solutions, and certainly that did a lot with VMware, but I also did things around Hyper-V, as well as Zen Server was pretty popular at the time with Citrix, so I did a lot wrapped around that. So back when we were talking like ESX 2.0, or if you remember VMware GSX, I did a lot with that as well. I've been a VMware VCP since vSphere 3, right? So I am a little bit of a fanboy of VMware, and obviously, like you guys, I'm kind of disappointed in the direction that they're kind of going. But I am excited about, what HPE is doing in this area. I will say that when VMware started making their changes, I, as you did, probably stood up and looked around and took a look at what the landscape was out there and what I could utilize. And a lot of people were standing up with Nutanix, and I'm not going to, bash a Nutanix product. I think they make a pretty decent product. But one thing it didn't do, a lot of people seem to have to buy new hardware with it. Also, it didn't interact with shared storage at all. You had to use their kind of software-defined storage in their environment. And when you look at hyperconverged platforms, you want to look at the weakest link inside any environment. You really want to focus in on the software-defined storage, because that's going to tell you where that platform kind of lives or dies. So, if I could extend that out a little bit further, I think, anybody who's worked with vSAN for a while does realize that there are hiccups, and when the hiccups happen, they are generally pretty major in an environment. So software-defined storage is good. It can perform, but that's usually where I focus in on. So I questioned that a little bit. I also tried other open source products, like I did Proxmox as well. And I thought that package was pretty good. Their backup integration wasn't too bad. They had a little backup application. But again, they really wanted you to use software-defined storage. They did integrate with some shared storage, but what they wanted to do was LVM partitions on shared storage, which isn't like a file, like a shared file. Like your virtual machines wouldn't be VMDK files. They'd be a partition, and then all your virtual machine files would be in that. And that doesn't work really well with a lot of lot of tools that are out there. So, and plus a lot of people didn't like the support model that they have. They're overseas and they're not necessarily awake when our customers are awake and things like that. So I kind of set that aside. I did some other things that were open source like XCPNG, and I was happy to hear that VMware was coming down this route. Now, VMware announced this product, their intention to make a hypervisor last year at HPE Discover. And shortly after that, they acquired Morpheus, and Morpheus was kind of developing something themselves. They had something in their labs. HPE kind of took notice of that and then moved that forward to the product that we have today. So their intention to announce was that Discover last year, December 20th is when this was released. So this came out pretty quickly. I know a lot of people like to stop and say, well, we'll wait, get past the 1.0 product and go for the 2.0 product or something like that before we release an introduction. But I'll say you probably don't need to, wait for that with this product. This management interface that we're looking at is a subset from HPE's, Morpheus Platform Ops. So now they've changed the name of this product a little bit. Instead of just calling it VM Essentials, they call it Morpheus VM Essentials, because this management interface is a subset of the Morpheus Platform Ops management interface. As a matter of fact, if you get familiar with this interface, you should be able to manage around the Morpheus platform. Now, the Morpheus Platform Ops does a lot more. This environment will manage VM Essentials will manage both VMware as well as VM Essentials clusters, whereas the full Morpheus platform will manage, you name it. It'll do Nutanix, it'll do Hyper-V, it'll do public cloud, private cloud, so Azure, AWS, all right, Kubernetes environments, all through one interface. Right? That's really their kind of claim to fame, is having holistic management and be able to automate a lot of tasks that are wrapped around with that in an environment. And you'll see some of that as we kind of work through that. All right, so HP came out with this product. Now, I've been on working with this since the beta. So I probably got involved with beta around September or October of last year. And when they first came out, they were like, well, we don't know if we're going to have all the features. But when they did release, they had all the features that I thought were important, or what put virtualization on the map. So things like live migration, so moving a virtual machine between different hosts, while it's running, the vMotion alternative, they had that kind of baked in. High availability, so if a host fails, well, all those virtual machines power up on another host. Absolutely, so they had that baked in as well. Migration of virtual machine hard drives between different storage platforms, they have that built in. So the storage vMotion alternative. So they had a lot of these pieces built in into the solution. Snapshots, they do have integrated backups. We'll have a whole conversation about backups as we go through this. They have that integrated in. Once I have the basics for virtualization, I start to look at backups and what I want to do with that in the environment. So first thing is it does have virtual machine snapshots, and you want to kind of treat them the same way you treat VMware snapshots. You want to take them, use them, and once you're done with them, you want to get rid of them. So I would consider this a huge value add as far as virtualized environments. I can't tell you how many times before I did an update on a system, I took a snapshot of that system. All right, performed the update. If I was happy, I moved along. If not, I reverted the snapshot. So that's really, really big. And also this has backups. Now I'll tell you, the backups are pretty basic. You can back up virtual machines off the platform to remote places. That could be a public cloud as well. You could back them up. You can either do full backups or integral backups, and they have a little bit of scheduling that's wrapped around it as well. So a lot of people want to stop me here and talk about third-party backup integration. So I'm going to stop here and talk a little bit about support. Now I'll get into this management interface. I just want to kind of talk about some of these things before we kind of dig in. By the way, what you're looking at here, I would say, would be the vCenter alternative. It acts as kind of your central management plane, and it is a virtual machine as well. If I go under incidences here, right, there is that incident that contains that virtual machine. So this is a management interface, much like vCenter is a virtual machine that you kind of power up. But let's talk about compatibility and hardware compatibility. So the first thing I want to point out is this product is $600 per socket per year, right? That includes 24/7 support, right? So bring as many cores as you want. So you could go out and get maybe like a DL325 Gen 11 server, 192 cores, and completely license that thing for $600. Right? That's pretty amazing as far as the cost perspective is concerned, especially for all the features that include. And a couple other things is like they do have a software defined storage if you want to use this. It's based off Ceph. All right, but it's so that'd be like a vSAN alternative. So they do have something like that inside this. And if you don't know by now, like this is the management interface of this. They're at version 8 of this as far as the larger Morpheus platform ops. The underpinnings of this is all open source solutions. So things like KVM, QEMU, libverts, Open vSwitch. Pacemaker, Core Sync, all these solutions are kind of brought together under this. And your customer can download that if they want to, right? And try to figure out how to put all those pieces together. If you've ever done anything open source that involves a lot of pieces like that, it certainly can be troublesome. But this kind of gives you an automated process where it's all put together. So the hypervisor isn't first generation and the management isn't first generation. That's why I say this solution is baked and kind of ready to go. So back to compatibility. When they released this in December 20th, they came out with support for the Electra MP B10000 storage solution via iSCSI and Gen 11 servers. All right, so about a month and a half after that, they added support for the Electra 6000. So if you don't know, the Electra MPB 10,000, that lives off the 3-power chain of solutions, and the Electra 6000 that lives off, I would say, the Nimble chain of solutions that are out there. So if you look at the underpinnings of those solutions, you'd be familiar if you use any one of those platforms. So they came out, about a month and a half, they came out with support for the Electra 6000, and I would say maybe a week or 2 weeks later, they added support for the Electra 5000, and that's just the hybrid array, and as well as the all-flash array they added support for. So that was kind of interesting. Another month later, they added support for DL300 series Gen 10 Plus servers. They started putting those in, and then they added, a week later, they added fiber channel support for the Electra MP. Just recently, I've seen them add the MSA 2070s into this solution. So support for this product is a moving target. And a lot of people would come to me and say, hey, what about Gen 10 servers? I got a lot of customers that have Gen 10 servers. And my talk usually to them at the time was that, hey, you got to follow the money, right? This is a $600 license. Right, nobody's closing their quotas out on a $600 license. I'm like, I bet they won't go back to it. I'm not going to say never. I bet they don't go back to that, but I don't expect them. And they would also say, how about third-party, support? And I used to say no, but just recently, they've added NetApp and some Dell servers, and I think they added a Pure storage system in there as well into the compatibility list. So I'm never going to say never ever again. So I don't know necessarily what they're going to plan support for. Obviously, if there's big opportunities of people that have on there. So there's what's supported, and then there's what this works on. All right. So I will tell you that I've installed this on a variety of systems. It works on almost anything. All right. Now, you may come back to me and say, hey, well, will HPE support this if I install it on anything, a Gen 9 server? And I'll tell you, you don't want to go there because you're going to leave them out. Now, you're going to run into some sales reps or SAs. They'll say they'll give you your best efforts. But in my eyes, I don't ever want to give those people an out on a call when I'm having issues. So stick with the supported stuff. But I'm telling you that this works on almost anything, so you can run this inside a lab. So, for example, this setup here, I'm running on a Synergy platform, Gen 9 blades in a Synergy platform. Now, I'm not going to call up HPE and scream if something's not working right. I kind of know what I'm getting into, right? They do support, I think, Synergy Gen 11 blades at this time. But anyways, this runs on Synergy 9 and Gen 9 blades. This one over here, whoops, I want to stay logged in. This one over here actually is nested virtual machines, right? Actually inside VMware, all right? And you can do that as well. If you're going to do that, you want to try that, talk to me, because there's some things you're going to need to do in order to be able to get that to work. But it works, right? And I do my demonstrations on these two platforms. All right, so hardware compatibility list is ever growing. If you're going to offer this solution to your customer, and I highly recommend it, talk to our solution design and services, SDNS, the tech support, and talk to them about compatibility. So pull up a most recent compatibility list and take a look, and make sure you've got something that's on the supported list. Now I kind of got into this because I started talking about backups. So let's talk about third-party backup integrations, because that's what people want to do. So what I will say is first off, this has a lot of features and functionality. Does it have everything that VMware does? Of course not. All right, so if you have somebody who's look at individual solutions that your customer is using, but if they want just the basics of virtualization, this certainly does it. All right, I say it does more than just some of the basics. All right. So once I've got that, I want to be able to back this up. There is integrated backup. So like I mentioned, you can offload those. As a matter of fact, if I go over here under infrastructure and down to storage, and this would be storage at the infrastructure level. Remember, for storage for virtual machines, you present at a cluster level. So the storage that's over here is mainly for your image repositories, ISOs, or virtual machine templates, or backups even. All right, and you could do a bunch of things. Like, for example, there's S3 if you want to use that. All right, I'm using a file share for my external backups as well as my library, and I just got this cheesy NFS server that's over there, right? And if I edit that, you can see I've set it for my default image store as well as my backup repository. All right, so you can do that. Also, the Electra MP B10,000 solutions, they'll talk about a lot of the marketing material. They'll talk about a plugin. I would highly recommend the B10,000 as a part of this solution, because you can integrate it in directly, and it'll automate the configuration of iSCSI as well as the creation of volumes in this. It'll add a lot of resources. You'll make a lot of your path to this product a lot easier. Not to say, again, you can't use it with other solutions, but you'll be doing some Linux iSCSI commands to get those up and running, which is not hard, but it's something that you'll need to be aware of. All right, so back to third-party backups. Right, so third-party backups integration. Well, there is a backup solution that's in here already. Right, it might get you by as far as your customers' concerns. Obviously, HPE stands up and says we're coming out with a hypervisor. Everybody in the industry who's doing backup is like, yeah, we're going to integrate this because HPE is big as VMware or Broadcom is. All right, so the who's who that's out there is going to integrate. And I thought it was going to be Veeam first. HPE had a white paper for how to integrate Veeam, and it's probably still out there, talking about how you can integrate today by using agent-based backups. And if you don't know what that is in Veeam, that's how you back up a physical server. You put an agent on it and you back it up. So you can treat the virtual machines like physical systems and back them up. But I thought Veeam was going to come out with first-class citizenship for virtualization, treat it just like, they VMware cluster or Nutanix cluster or anything like that. That's not here yet. It's supposed to be coming soon. I've heard different stories as it's imminent. It might be another, few months. The vendor that has come out first with full support is Commvault. All right, so they have full virtualization support for this inside the environment, and they support agents as well, if you care. But there's going to be other solutions. Certainly, Cohesity is on the map. Zerto is on the map, and I'm going to certainly talk a little bit more about Zerto as we kind of go through this, because I think that's got another piece of what's going on. So all right, that's enough of me blabbing. Let me show you a few things about this. So something I got to kind of get your head wrapped around is our incidences. So if you see over here, I'm selecting incidences, and these are the incidences that contain my virtual machines. What I will tell you that more often than not, an incident will contain one virtual machine in it, but it doesn't have to be. An incident contain multiple virtual machines of it. And basically, what you want to have is you're going to have multiples, and you want them all configured the same. So an example I might give, if you look at the larger Morpheus platform ops, right, you might have containers. right? And you might have 100 containers running a web server, Nginx or something like that, right? You want to manage that as one entity or one incident inside your own. So that's kind of the concept behind incidences, right? And I got a whole bunch of them here. So for example, I could grab this move me incident here. All right, you can see incident and then move me listed above. And it's kind of unfortunate. The virtual machine is the same name as the incident. All right, but this is the virtual machine under here. And if I click on that virtual machine, you see this changes to compute and then the virtual machine name. Now, I'm making a point of this just so you know that there's that kind of tier approach to this, but there's different options or different actions you're going to get at a virtual machine level as opposed to an incident level. All right, namely, all right, snapshots, all right, backups will be at an incident level. So that's just something to be aware of. All right, but either at an incident or at a virtual machine level, I can get access to a console over here. All right, and if I wake this machine up, I should wake up in a second, right? You know, I can interact with this. All right, activate maybe my Windows. I should do that, right? Right, and I could do that. Now, if this was an incident that contained multiple virtual machines, when I clicked on console, it would ask me what system would want me to connect to. All right, so that's kind of the relationship and what an incident is. That's how I can interact with an incident. I could certainly disconnect this if I felt like it and have a holistic view of kind of my window if I wanted to. I'm going to leave it kind of in the space, but you know, I can do things at this point. So for example, if I go into the virtual machine itself, right, I can migrate this virtual machine. So right now it's sitting on this host right here. And if I go under infrastructure and compute, right, you'll see that I have 3 different hosts, right, a couple of VMware hosts as well, but 3 different hosts. And that virtual machine, I think, was sitting on 2. Let's go take another look over here. So scroll back down. All right, so it's sitting on VM Essentials 2. Now, if I wanted to migrate that from 2 over to 1, right, I would just go over to Actions, do Manage Placement, move it from 2 over to 1, save changes, all right, and the migration will start to happen. Now, I know in VMware, they've got this bar along the bottom, and you can see what's kind of happening in your environment. It's a little different here. You're going to click on History, and it's not showing right now, but if I do a refresh, all right, we'll see that migration start to happen. If I want to get more information, I click the down arrow. I could even get more over here. All right, and that'll migrate on the environment. All right, so now that we've kind of got our basic sea legs on as far as what's going on, what I'm going to do is I want to go over to this other cluster here, and I've got some of the same virtual machines kind of created. All right, you're gonna have to forgive me a little bit. I'm gonna give it an attempt on this. So I'm going to try to show you HA as well as the load balancing feature, the DRS-like feature, because it certainly has that as well. But this is that nested virtualization host. So sometimes this hiccups on me. It works most of the time, but sometimes it hiccups on me. So give me a little bit. All right, so I've got this Move Me virtual machine that's here. Again, this guy is sitting on, so this is the second cluster, the third host. All right, so again, if I go to infrastructure, and then compute, you'll see I have 3 hosts. All right, so this guy exists again on the 3rd host. All right, this is the 3rd host there. So I'm going to right click. Oh, I should show you probably it's a functioning machine, right? Let me open up a console. Go into the machine itself. All right, again, we can see it's on the 3rd host. We can open up a console. All right, wake this guy up a little bit. All right, we can see it's available. All right, so what I'm going to do is we're going to go over here and I'm going to power off that 3rd host. Now I'll say HA, probably not as quick as VMware is, but it's quick enough. All right, this guy will come up. We'll come back and we'll look at this guy in a little bit. All right, and we will see that it will come back up on another host. All right, so if I go, let's go into the virtual machine itself. Where is the virtual machine? Oh, we're at the virtual machine. So I go back in the console over here just to show you this guy's kind of gone. Right, I can't hit the Control-Alt-Delete. This isn't working. This guy isn't waking up. All right, so I'm going to go to infrastructure. I'm going to go back to compute. All right, and we're going to wait for this hopefully to turn red, and then we'll see that machine start up on another host. So we'll come back and look at it. And then what I'll do is, whether or not that works or not, which it does most of the time, keep in mind it's a nested virtual machine, so it looks a trip on me once in a while. I'll turn the host back on and watch the load balancing feature, the DRS alternative, move it back into the environment. All right, so we'll see if we can't get that to kind of go. Let's see, let's go back over to this cluster while we're waiting for that. Let's show you some other things. So I'm gonna go through the process of creating a virtual machine in this environment. Before I do that, let's talk about infrastructure itself. So just kind of like you have a tiered approach in VMware. Like if you go look inside vCenter, off to the side, on the left, you'll see, the vCenter server itself. Underneath that, you'll see the data center. Then you'll see a cluster, and then you'll have your ESX host, and then all your virtual machines. So you kind of think like that a little bit in this. So you'll have groups, and groups will be at the top. This is where your users and rights will be assigned. Clouds, I would say clouds are your management interfaces into your different solutions, whether they're on-prem or up in the cloud. So for example, they only support VMware and Morpheus VM Essentials, right? But in a larger Morpheus platform ops, what else could be in here? It could be Nutanix, it could be Hyper-V, it could be Kubernetes cluster, it could be AWS, it could be Azure, it could be all those inside this environment, right? But that's what clouds are. And then we've got clusters underneath that. So I got my VM Essentials clusters in here, and then we got hosts, and then we got networking. I will say that the networking most resembles a distributed switch like in VMware, meaning that if I create a VLAN in there, it'll be applied across all the hosts in the environment. All right, so let's go over and let's create ourselves a virtual machine. Oh, another thing I wanted to point out, that's where I was going, networking. There's also storage, and we were already in here, and you could see that I have this shared NFS repository, and this is where I'm putting my images that are in my image library, and those will be up here. All right, so before I go to virtual images, I'm gonna go to automation, because again, this platform can do automation tasks as well. And a larger Morpheus platform, right, this would be bread and butter for this solution. But I can go over here and click add, and even in this platform, I give a name. Anytime you see code, think of like this is going to be a variable inside this environment. But I could do shell scripts, PowerShell scripts, could do it via sudo if I wanted to, if you're doing Linux, and then put my code inside here. Right, so certainly I could have these tasks, and when I deploy a virtual machine, there'll be a part where I could call one of these if I wanted to. Right, but we'll go over to virtual images. So these are my images. They're uploaded. Again, they're on my external repository. If I didn't call out an external repository, it'd put on these local systems. If you wanted to do that, I suggest an external repository. You can see I've got a bunch of ISOs in here, right, as well as a QCOW2. So QCOW2, if you don't know, that is the open virtualization hard drive format. So in VMware, you think of a VMDK file. In this world, it'd be a QCOW2 file. All right, so I could certainly upload that. You can also upload VMDK files. Here's my other cluster, and here is a VMDK file listed over here as well. All right. So the thought process is really create your first virtual machine with an ISO. After that, create a copy it to the library, and then clone that off. And I guess we probably do that quite a bit today. We usually have virtual machine templates that in VMware that we clone over and over again. So you want to kind of think of that process as well. So I've got all these ISOs listed here. I also have a virtual machine, a QCOW2 virtual machine in here. So I'm going to use one of these ISOs to deploy a virtual machine. I'm actually going to do a small Ubuntu server. I have something else I'd like to show you maybe a little bit about on deployment, but we'll go over here. I'm going to click add. I'm going to do VM Essentials. So once you have VMware integrated with this, and I'll show you some of that, you could choose where you want to deploy a virtual machine if you wanted to. So I could do VM Essentials, or I could do VMware if I wanted to, but we're going to do VM Essentials. I'm going to select that. I'm going to click next. All right, I'm going to select the groups because that's where the rights are going to be assigned. What cloud I want to apply that to, and then the incident name. And I'm going to call this delete me just so I remember to get rid of it later. There is this environment thing. I don't know. Haven't seen it where it does too much. I suppose it means a little bit more in the larger Morpheus platform. But anyway, I'm going to click next. And here's my virtual machine configuration. So I'm going to create a single virtual machine. These plans are all pre-configured. You can create new plans of CPU and RAM combinations to your heart desires if you wanted to. But these come by default. I'm going to use 2 CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM. Maybe I'll make this a 100 gig hard drive. I'll let it pick on the data store. Nah, I think I'll put it on the Electra MP. And it's got 1 network adapter, but if I wanted to add more, I'm just going to click the plus sign over here. So there's 2, 3, and then 4. All right, and then I can assign them to my network. So I'll do 2 on 81, and I'm going to do 2 on, let's do 82. I know that works. All right, and I got a reason for doing this. I'll talk to you a little bit about later, but I just want you to focus on the virtual machine creation right now. All right, here's my image. I'm going to pull that out of my image repository that I just showed you, or the library I just showed you. Here's that Ubuntu server image that existed. Then I could choose a host if I wanted to. All right, but after I'm done here, I could click next. All right, here's where I could call out those tasks if I want to call out a task. And if I click next one more time, it'll be a summary. But I'm going to back up a little bit because I want to show you something else. So when you deploy a VMware virtual machine, right, you need to have the correct virtual hardware underneath it because the drivers need to exist for that. And I don't know if you've been doing VMware for a long time, sometimes you grab the long operating system, during the deployment, and the hard drive won't show up or something like that, or the NICs won't show up for one reason or another. So there's this virtual hardware that kind of exists. Right? Now, in a KVM environment or inside Morpheus VM Essentials, they use the open source, and they're called VirtIO drivers. Right, so that's the hardware platform. And what I will tell you is that every Linux distribution since, I don't know, since KVM was introduced, has these VirtIO drivers built into the Linux kernel. All right, that's the thing with Linux. A lot of the drivers are built into the kernel. All right, so they will be there. Right, now, in a Windows platform, they will not be there. So I have to get the VirtIO drivers in there. So all of us have probably done an install of Windows. Maybe it's had a RAID controller in there. You get to the point where it asks you what hard drives, and you get that big old blank white screen that shows you that there's no hard drives to be found. All right, then you got to have, ask you if you have a disk or something like that. All right, so what you're going to do in this case, because that's what you're going to see, is you're going to go into advanced configuration, and then you're going to do attach VirtIO drivers. All right. Then when you get to that point, it'll either automatically discover the drivers are there and the hard drive will show up, or you'll just click have a disk and you'll fish them out from this, and then you'll move forward. All right. So that's my discussion wrapped around there. All right, I'm going to click next, and I'm going to complete, and we're going to start the deployment of the system. Now, once the system is deployed, in VMware, what do you do? Well, the next thing you do is you install VMware tools inside that environment, right? So in this environment, it's called QEMU guest agent. So if I'm in a Linux platform, all right, and I like to use Ubuntu, and this is my putty session into a system, I would do sudo, apt get, or whatever your package manager, so you might be using pacman or something like that, apt-get install, and I would do QEMU guest agent, and I'm not going to run this, but if I hit enter, it would go pull that out from the cloud, install, and it's just the way you do most normal installations. And then you'd have the kind of the VMware tools alternative installed inside the system. Now, with a Windows system, what you're going to do is once the operating system finishes an install, that ISO will still be attached, and you'll go into that ISO, and obviously there will be an executable for the QEMU guest agent, and you'll install that, and you'll be good to go. Now, there's just one other piece that you want to do as a part of this, and that will be to get the Morpheus agent deployed. So for example, let me see, we might be able to do it with this. If I go over here, all right, and I go into my virtual machine itself, all right, you'll see that agent version not installed, right? And And this won't work because we're just doing the install. But if this was a finished install of the operating system, I could go over here and then do install agent, and it would install the Morpheus agent on there, and you'd get a number in there. And if it didn't work, you could download the script and just bring it out. It's just a script that pulls the agent from off this VM Essentials server and places it inside the environment, right? And then if you've done everything right, it will look something like this over here. So first off, our virtual machine, the vMotion migration worked. But if I go in here a little bit further, we can see that there's an agent version on this. Right. Once that's done, clone this virtual machine into your image library, and then or sysprep it or whatever you do, and then put it into the library and use it over and over again. Right. Make life a lot easier. So that's how you deploy a virtual machine. Now I'm going to go another step further and talk to you about the process for getting VM Essentials up and running inside your environment. Now, this is just to give you a kind of an understanding of the steps that you need to go through, right? An abbreviation of the install guide, but I just want to let you know kind of the process for doing this. Now, one thing to realize that HPE is working in conjunction with Ubuntu to have an automated installer for this, so you can happen a lot quicker. I don't know when that's going to happen, but they are working along that process to do that. But the first thing you need to do with your host is you need to install Ubuntu. You can do two different versions of your Ubuntu. You can do 2204 or 2404. They're both long-term support versions, right? You're going to place those down on a system, and you're going to do the updates for them. So if you haven't done the updates, that'll be, again, a sudo apt-get update, and then sudo apt-get upgrade. It'll take a little time. You'll do the latest updates. If you're using 2204, there's something else that you need to pull down from the image repository for Ceph if you want to use their software-defined storage. That's another piece. But anyways, you want to get Ubuntu installed and it all updated to the latest version. All right. After that, you're going to go through the install process on that. Well, let me back up. You're going to get Ubuntu installed on the system and get it all updated. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Ubuntu install process, right? And that's one of the reasons why I created this virtual machine in the fashion that I did. All right. So what I will say is I'm going to show you this in a virtual machine, but pretend this is a physical server that I'm doing this on, right? And I'm trying to set this up to be my VM Essentials hypervisor. All right, so I'm going to certainly go in, select English. All right, we're going to move forward on the layout of the keyboard. We're certainly going to install Ubuntu server. Oh, one thing I should mention is don't do Ubuntu desktop. Load it down. It won't work for you. You'll get all kinds of headaches. You want to use Ubuntu server. So no desktops. No, at all. All right. So now I want to talk about support for this system with network interfaces. All right, so how many network interfaces do I need to use to be able to support the solution? And they want you to use 6, but you can go down to 4. All right, with 6, they want you to take 2, put them in a bond, and have that be your management adapter or your management interface. Then they want you to take another 2, put them in a bond to be your compute traffic. All right, and then they want you to put the last 2, leave them alone, and that'll be your MPIO traffic to your iSCSI storage or 2 fiber channel adapters if you want to do that, if you're talking to the Electro MP fiber channel. All right, now that's 6. Some people push back and go 6. That's a lot of network adapters. So what they say is you can also ride the management interface on the compute network as a VLAN if you want to. So that brings you down to 4. So if you're familiar with NetPlan, Ubuntu and NetPlan, you can go through and configure that if you want. I find it a lot easier to do through the install process, and that's the way the documentation will show you. So, for example, I'm at the install process. You can see I have my network adapters listed here. All right, I'm going to go down to create. Whoops, too much. Go to create bond, and I'm just going to select the network adapters I want to create a bond with. So I'm going to select these 2. All right, and then what type of bond mode do I want? They support 802.3 AD or they support XOR. So 802.3 AD, that's if you can do LACP to your switch, or you have access to that switch, you can set up LACP links. You'd want to do that. If you don't know switch, don't have access to switch, don't know how to set up 802.3 AD, the switch doesn't support it, use balance XOR. All right. So I'm going to do 802.3 AD, and then you could set this to fast, and then we'll click create. All right, so there I have that bond, and that's the easiest way to create that. You also need similar network interfaces across multiple systems. Every once in a while, you get a network interface that isn't labeled the same, but if you create bonds, that'll always be the same interface, if you will. All right, so now I've got two interfaces that are cooked with this bond. Maybe I'll use these two for my storage interfaces. Now I need that management interface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to that bond, and I'm going to create a VLAN tag. All right, I'm going to do VLAN 86, we'll say, and then create. And if you notice, the main interface is bond 0, and this will be VLAN 86. All right, I'm good. All right, so now I'm going to move forward. All right, done. And I'm going to go through the rest of this install process. All right, and then again, I'll do the update of Ubuntu and all the systems. All right, after that's done, I'm going to go up to HPE site, and I'm going to download the ISO for this. So if I look over here, here's this ISO, and I've cracked it open here. And inside this ISO will be two files really. We can ignore this README. You're going to take these files, and you're going to use something like SSH and then drop them up on each host. Actually, you need this one on each one of the hosts, and this one where you want to deploy the management interface, this Morpheus VM Essentials management interface on. All right, so for example, if we look over here, here's one of my hosts, VM Essentials, the second cluster, host 1. I've got both those files on there. And then what I'll do is I'm going to install that. So I would do a sudo apt install. I could type. It's going to be a file, and then I'll say it's going to be in this folder, and then we'll start typing that out. And you'll run that. You'll do that on all 3 of the hosts. Now, I'm not going to run this, but just so you are aware, Ingram Micro's integration services can get you up to this point. All right, they can install Ubuntu, they can update it all you want, and they can drop both those files so you can get these servers, right? And they're ready to go, and all you need to do is give them their hypervisor personality with this command. All right, you'll do that on all the hosts, and then after that, you're going to install the VM Essentials management. If you notice, this is a zipped up QCOW file. So if I do, I probably want to run this as administrator. But once I've installed this, I have access to this command, HPE VM. I hit enter, and just like VMware has their console interface, this would be the console interface. And certainly there's different things that you can do. But down here is install the VME manager. Right, I go through, and there's some things that make sense. This would be the IP address of the VME manager, the netmask, the gateway, DNS servers, the appliance URL, host names to go on your DNS server and create an entry for this. Obviously, the password, and then there's an image URI, and that would be to point to this other file that's over there. This other file here, this much larger QCOW file, right? Oh, that's not the right file. The larger QCOW file that's in there. Now, this is a little bit older version, 1 decimal point behind. The newer one, you can actually browse it out and pull it out. But what I want to point out here is during the install, you got to tell it its management interface. All right, so the management interface in our case was not bond 0. It was bond 0 on 86. All right, and I'd go through and do that deployment. And once you're done with that, and I'm going to exit out of this. Oh, I should have boarded. I could have went the other way. All right, we're going to exit this. Once you're done with that, you can start creating your clusters. Now, again, it won't take too long. I'm talking longer than it'll really take, especially if you use our integration services. All right, get it all up and running. And then you go through and you kind of create your group, all right, which is just pretty much a name. You go and add your cloud. All right, so you do Morpheus Cloud, click Next. You kind of work through that. That's again pretty much given a name. And then you create a cluster out of your hosts. All right, I've got one cluster. So that would be looks something like this. So I'm going to deploy a cluster on VM Essentials. All right, I'm going to select the group I want to associate it to, because again, that's rights. All right, I'm going to want to choose the cloud. I've only got one here. And again, we'll just call it cluster. And then we're going to start calling out our hosts. So basically, you're going to give your host name. So in my case, it was HPE VM Essentials 1. I plug in the IP address of this guy. All right, 80.191. All right, now I'd add that in, and this would go through, and this would create one host. You can do a single host. You're just going to have that manager kind of running. Now, if you're going to use shared storage, all right, you need 3 hosts in the environment. So that's something to be aware of. Some people push back a little bit on me, but I say, hey, why are we buying these 2 old dual socket systems? We have these wonderful Intel or AMD single socket systems with a lot of cores that'll save you money, and you can get that 3rd host in there. So you do need 3 hosts. You're going to have shared storage, Letra MP, any of them, MSA, right? So you get 3 hosts, and again, you fill this out. All right. And then again, you put in all the IP addresses and whatnot. And then you'll put in the username and password to SSH into each one of those systems. So you want the same across all platforms, right? And then under here, you're going to put your management interface. And if you remembered in my case, that was Bond 086. You're going to do the computer interface as well. Right? You're going to do VLANs. So I don't know, let's look at that. Right, and then you're going to be good to go, and it's going to create that cluster for you. And then you can start creating virtual machines. All right. Now, this is also where you'll do, if you want to do software-defined storage. I'm going to show you the little bit of difference in that as well. So you take the drop-down box here, you set cluster on existing. You notice how it defaults to 3. Again, you need the username and password. You'll need your management interface again. In our case, that was 86. You'll need a storage interface. This will be an interface for the software-defined storage. If you don't put anything in here, it'll just use your management interface, right? So you can kind of get around doing that. And again, you'll need that. The only other piece you'd need is you need to tell it where it's software-defined storage, where the space for their software-defined storage, so the extra drive that exists that you're going to use, and that's where you'll place that there. All right, so that kind of gives you a quick overview. Certainly not holistic. If you want to talk more about it, I can certainly get it. But that is the process. You remember our solution. You remember our integration services can get you most of the way to where you just got to give it its hypervisor personality and then go create your cluster out of that. All right, so let's go take a look over here. See if the failure happened. Let's go look at our infrastructure and then compute. All right, we can see our host failed. Right, I can go over to provisioning and incidences. We'll go down. It doesn't look like our virtual machine powered up. All right, so this kind of failed. Well, maybe we'll wait a little bit longer, see if it starts. I don't think it's gonna though. Actually, we'll just start it. So this guy will start, and when we start it up, it's gonna start on probably VM Essentials 2, and we'll come back and look at it and see if I can't get the DRS piece to work. But it does work on all the physical platforms I deploy this on. It works all the time. I don't know what's up with the virtualized environment. It just does that sometimes. So let's see. We got a few more minutes. Let's talk about some other things real quick. So we can certainly talk about VMware integration. So if I go over to infrastructure, I go to clouds, I can add my VMware environment in if I wanted to. All right, so that's just clicking add. All right, selecting VMware here, click next. All right, you're going to give it some name that'll be identifiable in here. More importantly, you're going to put your URL to your vCenter server, and you're just going to tack on SDK or software development kit. That's where VMware keeps their software development kit inside vCenter. You could do IP addresses as well as if you wanted to, but just got to tack on this SDK. Then you'll need to put your vCenter credentials in. There is a repository stored where somebody could select it if they wanted to instead of giving them the credentials. All right, and then once you do that, this will populate at the highest level inside vCenter, and then you can add that in. All right, and once you've added it in, you can actually browse and explore that. All right, and you can look at all the virtual machines that exist on those that vCenter environment. Now, what I will tell you is look at all these virtual machines that I have here, but let's go over to provisioning and incidences. And we will see that I really only have 2 VMware virtual machines over here. So what gives? Why do I only have 2 incidents of VMware virtual machines? Well, I have to create the incident out of it to make it fully functional in this. So for example, I go to incident, I go back to clouds, I'll go down to VM Essential, the VMware environment. We'll look at virtual machines again, and I don't know, I'll just grab some virtual machine. We'll grab this guy here. Well, actually, we'll grab this one. All right, so maybe I want to manage that one through VM Essentials. So what I'll do is I'll go under Actions and I'll convert to Manage. And if I do that, it'll create the incident and then place the virtual machine in that incident. And then it's a first-class citizen inside here. I can run tests against that. I can do the backups to the external repository or place it up in the cloud. All right, I can do whatever I can do that I've shown you with VM Essentials in this. Migrate virtual machines. All those things can be done. All right, so which leads me to another portion. So a lot of people ask me about, hey, how do I migrate from a VMware environment into a VM Essentials environment? And what I'll say is there's marketing slides that are out there today that'll say that if you can get your VMDK inside a library, all right, so you can bring those in, you can back up the virtual machine and recover it, and they'll show up in the library as well. Right. If you can get your VMDK in a library, you should be able to click over here, and instead of a download button, there'll also be a convert button to convert that from the VMDK to a QCOW. I have not seen that yet, so keep that in mind. I've seen that inside marketing material, but I haven't seen it available. I've got the latest version of VM Essentials, so I think this is 8.0.4, and I think the latest is 8.0.5. And I haven't seen it yet, but I haven't finished my testing, so maybe it's there. I just haven't found it quite yet, or I haven't done the right things to make it available yet. But it's not there. Before this, what they would tell you, before this shows up, what they tell you is that there are many open source tools that are out there that'll convert a VMDK file into a QCOW2 file if you wanted to. All right, and you could run through that, and that was a part of their instructions was to do that. So keep in mind that with that, obviously these are virtual machines, so they're larger in size. All right, so you need to get that larger virtual machine or your virtual machine up in this environment, so that takes time. You need to run it through this conversion process, will take time, and then you could, because it's a template in your library, you can now deploy this. So that's going to take a little bit of time. So it is a solution that's there that you can convert, right? But really what the future is for doing this is really going to be with Zerto. All right, so today Zerto will allow you to buy migration licenses and migrate virtual machines from one VMware environment into another VMware environment. Actually, there's a few different places you can migrate that to. All right. And if you don't know what Zerto does, it does, basically site-to-site replication at a virtual machine level. You actually take your virtual machines and put them in a production group. So if you had an app stack, you put them in a production group, and then you'd replicate that. And it is up to the moment based replication. It's not, it's not a snapshot-based replication. This is almost as close as you can get to synchronous-based replication you can. So every few seconds you'll have a valid a copy point of a VM. So they're looking at that. They're going to have you, when they come out with support for VM Essentials, you're going to replicate from a VMware environment into a VMware Essentials environment, press a button, and have the old machines go down and the new machines get powered up and start up. So that's where they're going. Like I mentioned, there's migration licenses. Now, Zerto integration support, they're telling me it's going to be before year's end is when that's going to appear. Just so you're aware that that's where we're going. But it is common, and you can utilize that if you want to. All right, I think we're running near the top of the hour. I could show you other things inside these environments if you wanted to. Let's take a look, see if this guy has come back up. Yeah, see, it's on 2. We could power it. If I power this, we're not going to get to see it, but if I power this guy, it'll migrate itself back on over to 3 in time. I've got other things that I could certainly show. I didn't show everything because a lot of this I did in, this is kind of part 2 of an initial 101 type of series where we kind of did a presentation and I demonstrated a little bit. A lot of that stuff I did in that initial one, like storage migration and snapshots and backup recovery. But I have the ability to do that. If you or your customers ever need to see that, just reach out. I just wanted this to be a more in-depth type of conversation into this environment. So clearly I have all kinds of demonstrations kind of set up here to be able to show you and your customer in there. So I think I'll stop it there and open it up in the last couple of minutes to any questions that people have. We're all going to be quiet.
John, there was one question in the chat. Is Dell PowerStore supported?
No, not at this time, but I don't know. You know, things change. I thought they weren't going to support any of the third-party hardware. I thought this was going to be an HPE playground, but they started adding some things, but I haven't seen PowerStore yet.
Thanks. That was the only question from the chat.
Okay. Well, I hope you guys find this informative. I hope this was good. You know, please reach out to me if you want to learn more, or if you have opportunities with your customer. Obviously, I won't be this technical with your end users. I'll show all the nifty things that they want to see as far as the interface is concerned. All right. Everybody have a nice Wednesday.
Thanks, everyone.